all yours.
No testing. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. They asked me to tell my story, and mine is not a day or an event. Mine is a lifetime story. It starts when I was 3 years old. We lived in a little country town in Nebraska called Weeping Water. We had maybe 200 people, including the farmers close to town. General store with a post office, a church, and a small railroad station. That was it. The only industry anywhere near was a sand and gravel pit near that they hauled sand out of. I lived there until I was about 4 before we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, the big town. The first house we lived in, we were there a short time when my father got sick with pneumonia and died, leaving my mother with 4 children, the oldest 5 and the youngest 9 days old the next day. No money, no insurance, funeral and doctors, hospital expenses. But she managed. I don't know how over the years. We always had something to eat, and we always had clothes on our backs through her endeavors of makeover clothes and begging crops from people, and always had a garden. Shortly after that, my aunt tried to commit suicide in the same house, so we moved over a few blocks closer to where my grandparents lived. We could walk over there 4 or 5 blocks, and became real active in the Sunday school. And it was then that my mother taught me my first lessons of giving. She would tie my collection in the corner of a hanky to make sure that I didn't lose it before I got to church. And that training has stuck with me to this day. If I think somebody needs something, no matter what, I take the money and do it rather than save it for something for myself. God has always given me more than I needed at the time. And walking back and forth to my grandparents' house, he was a Methodist minister and was at that time the treasurer for Bryan Memorial Hospital, and would go out and preach and bring in funds to the hospital to keep it running. And lots of times it would be animals or baskets of fruit or baskets of vegetables or crops even, oats and corn. They were all put to use to keep the hospital running. And as I went to their house and visited so much, we always had devotional and Bible study and prayer time every morning before we started our day, and that has stuck with me too. Shortly after that, as I grew a little bit older, began to be more involved in the church and the children's programs and on up into the teen years. And then when I was 13, my mother married again, and we moved out to the country and had to walk 1.5 miles to church. If I wanted to go to youth fellowship or anything at night, any of the ball games at school or anything, I had to walk in the long, dark 1.5 miles. But God always kept me safe. There was never a problem, even when the gypsies camped down at the creek bottom. When I graduated, I finished at mid-year, had enough credits to graduate then, and they decided we were going to get married the first of the weekend during Christmas vacation, and they decided at school that they were going to have vacation the 1st of November instead of Christmas because the boys needed to be out in the corn picking because so many of the men were gone to the war. So we hurriedly threw a wedding together and had it in 3 weeks, and everything went well, thank goodness. Just by word of mouth and phone and letters. we had a good crowd. It was a little country church, the only one close to where we lived. It was a Lutheran evangelical instead of a Methodist, which was new to me, but I found soon in taking catechism that it really wasn't that much different from the Methodist church. And we stayed there. He had to go in the hospital for surgery right after we got married, and so I stayed at home and continued to go to school, played in the volleyball tournament, and had a part in the senior play. And life went on as usual till he got out. Then we rented an apartment in town, and I got my first job working in the cafeteria out at the base, and then got sick and had to go home, leave the job, and very shortly I went to another one, and then I went home for the weekend to take care of some business, and lo and behold, my brothers and sisters had mumps, and I got the mumps. So I missed graduation. I was valedictorian, but I didn't get to go because I was sick with the mumps. Shortly after that, Joe got them, and he went to the hospital for 6 weeks like they did then. But we, at that time then, we began to travel. We moved 28 times in 24 years in service. We moved, when we left, he went to Topeka, Kansas from Lincoln, and then from there to Denver, Colorado. And we couldn't find housing, so we bought a little homemade trailer and stayed in it until the heat got so unbearable that with the baby we couldn't manage. So my parents drove out from Nebraska and pulled the trailer and brought us back to Lincoln. We had no air conditioning in the car, and we would buy a big chunk of ice and set it in a dish pan down on the floor and turn the fan on in the car, blow the air across so the baby's laying on the back seat would have. My mother had a baby at the same 3 weeks younger than mine. So we had the 2 babies and the 3 of us adults. But we made the trip fine, didn't have any problems, no car troubles. We left Lincoln and were transferred to Greenville, Mississippi. Bobby had a big scar on her hip, and the doctor said it needed to be removed. It was a blood blister type thing, and they were afraid it would turn into cancer. So she stayed in Lincoln and had the surgery, and I went on to Greenville, Mississippi, and then had to make the train trip back to get her as soon as they would let her travel. We stayed there a short time, and then he was transferred again. We went to Alabama and stayed with his folks. He went to Rome, New York, and found housing for us up there and came back and got us. I became pregnant with the 4th child up there, and he left and went to England for the Berlin Air Lift, not knowing how long he'd be gone. Ended up, it was 16 months, and came back, and we were here, there, and yonder, and then they sent him back to North Africa for 22 months. And I stayed in Alabama during that time and was there close to where his parents lived. We left there and went to Utah, and then back to San Antonio, Texas. When we filled the term there, they sent us to Amarillo, and from there he decided to retire. And our last duty station was Painfield, Washington, which is at Everett, just north of Seattle. And my parents were living in Portland, Oregon at the time, my sister in Seattle. So I had never been close to them in all my years in service, so we were very happy to be there. The 1st of May, after we got there, my mother came down with cancer, and they had breast cancer and an abdominal tumor, and it eventually went into bone cancer. By the 1st of the year that year, she had to go into a nursing home with a constant morphine drip. And so my sister and I would drive down on weekends, or whenever there was a rush call, we'd hop in the car and go. And it meant so much to me. I know God had a plan in sending us there. That Joe had requested somewhere south and east where it was warm, but God sent us to Washington. And a year to the date that they found the cancer, she passed away. And Joe decided that he was going to retire that September. We came back to Indiana with just one of our 5 children. The 2 boys both joined the Air Force that summer, Mike right out of high school, and Dick at Joe's retirement parade. And Carol got married, and her husband was on his way to Vietnam. And so she stayed in Washington, close to where Bobby was. And Bobby's boyfriend went to Vietnam, too. So they were there together for a year. And then we drove out and brought them back to Indiana, too. I had my first acquaintance with Maple Hill when Reverend Walker was assigned here. His car broke down on his way in that day he came to be here. And Joe went out on the interstate and towed him in and got the car fixed. And I got to visit with him there at the station while he was working on it. And began coming whenever I could. I was working full-time, and I'd go to the station and help with the books in the afternoon after I got through. And then in the summertime, I always had a big garden up there and would go home and clean and prepare fruit and vegetables and can till midnight and get up and go to work the next morning. And it was not easy for me to get to church. I'd always cook dinner on Saturday and Sunday for the people, the employees at the station, because there were no restaurants of any kind out here then. And they would get so busy by 12 o'clock that they couldn't stop to eat. So it always had to be there by 11:15 or 11:30. And so it didn't give me the opportunity to come to church until Joe became sick with cancer in March of 1980, and had his first surgery, and then another one a year later, and then they decided a year of chemo, and then did another surgery to be sure he was clear. I took a 2-month leave of absence from my job, and we took a motorhome trip around the United States. I went east through Iowa and Nebraska and Kansas up to Montana and across to Coeur d'Alene and Spokane and Seattle, and then down the coast to Portland and Merced and over to Phoenix and Albuquerque and Wichita Falls and several places around San Antonio and Pensacola, Florida, on another stop before we got to Eufaula, Alabama, where his mother lived, and then had to turn around and come home. My work was insurance was paying for his hospital bill, so I didn't dare quit at that time. But God worked so many miracles along the way. When Joe was getting close to the time that he was going to die, the business was going to have to change insurance companies, and the rates were going up so high. But they had decided that they would stay with the one they had, because if Joe was still sick, he couldn't get insurance. He wouldn't be covered. And he died the 4th of August, and the company was able to go ahead and change their insurance the 1st of September. They were so good to me in so many ways that way. I was able to take off time whenever I needed when he was sick, and they never argued with it, never measured my leave time or anything. It was there for me to have. And when they decided to go out of business 3 years later, they couldn't get insurance for one of the sub-companies. There were 4 companies involved. U.J. Baker was the parent company. And so they decided to close down, and some of the employees bought out the Baker, the Rectors Incorporated and Baker Farms Company. And they continued to work out at the Farm Street address. They asked me if I would continue to be bookkeeper for the company. I would be on full pay for 6 months, and then would they paid by the hour for the time I put in for the company until they finally closed the books and dispersed all the funds. Joe's income all stopped when he died, so I knew I had to make it on my own. That fall, when I was still working the 6 months, I got a call from a company to come and interview. They had a lady that was retiring at the end of the year and needed somebody to fill in and doing all sorts of office work, billing and data entry and everything. And so I went to work for them part-time in November, and by January was pretty much full-time, and they had moved a small file cabinet in for my Hughes Baker paperwork beside my desk, and I would stay after hours and work on it until I got it done. And when about a year after I started work there, the owner, who was not very employee-friendly, he didn't get along well with the employees, and there was always friction, decided to retire. And it was an employee-owned business, so he sold his stock to the current employees. When we had our first board meeting under the new president, CEO, he said, "Our primary purpose is to glorify God." And I said, "Yes, Lord, you did it again. You sent me to the right place at the right time." And I worked another 6.5 years for them, and it was the atmosphere turned around overnight, and it was a very pleasant place to work. I ended up, after that time, losing sight in my right eye, and found that they couldn't do anything for it, and I was having trouble reading timesheets and doing data entry and everything. So I told them I thought I needed to retire at the end of the year, but I would stay through January till all the taxes were done, because the other girl was not familiar with doing annual tax reports of any kind. They had a good going-away party for me, and gave me money for a trip that I was getting ready to go on to Spain, and invited me back for all the Christmas parties for years after that. And I was able to enjoy Bible studies on our lunch hours and in-house, as well as going to a restaurant where there was another Bible study once a week. And they were the truest of friends and the greatest blessings in my life. I don't know what I'd have done without them. But after I lost my sight, I got busy with volunteer work. I worked a lot with Riley Cancer Research for Children, making ornaments and things to sell. And then when they closed down, I started making caps and blankets for newborns in need and the babies in the intensive care units in the hospital. My eyes got to the point that I no longer could do the blankets, but I still can sit down and do a cap and without any light, just by feel. So I'm still making baby caps. But in the process, I went on several mission trips through the Methodist Church. I went to up in Alaska for 2 weeks, and I did 4 or 5 down in Texas. And then I began going with my eye doctor to mission trips in Honduras, where we fitted people with glasses and did cataract surgeries for the others. And God worked many miracles. One little man came out the first day I was there with this tiny little pocket Bible. You know how tiny the print is. And he was all bent over reading, trying to read that book, because he could now see with his glasses. Another lady went to see the doctor, got through, and he says, "Now, can you read and sew?" And she said, "No." He says, "Well, when you get your glasses, you'll be able to." So she went on to the dispensary and got her glasses. And when she came out, she was very disappointed. She couldn't see why she couldn't read. Well, come to find out, she didn't know how to read. And she thought those glasses were a miracle that were going to let her see. There were so many incidents like that during my 19-year trips down there that I can't begin to tell them all, but that's a sprinkling. And it's been God. I was anointed several times for my eyes to have healing. and nothing ever happened. And I kept saying, is my faith not strong enough, or does God have another plan for me? And here I am at 91, still doing His work, trying my best, and making the most of it. God is good all the time. You're right. God bless you all.